The security line at Denver International Airport stretched endlessly ahead of us, but my sister Julia couldn't stop smirking. She clutched her boarding pass like a trophy while I stood there empty-handed, watching her enjoy every second of my humiliation. What she didn't know was that in exactly 37 minutes, everything would change. The flight attendant's reaction would leave Julia speechless. Wayne would drop his expensive coffee, and Lori would grab her phone so fast she'd nearly crack the screen. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when Julia thought she held all the cards. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other family disaster. Our grandmother's funeral had ended 3 days ago in Portland, and now we were all supposed to fly back to our respective cities. Julia lived in Chicago, Wayne and his wife Lori were heading to Miami, and I was bound for Boston. The original plan seemed simple enough: book our flights, say our goodbyes, and return to our normal lives. But Julia had other plans. "Diana, we need to talk," she announced over breakfast at the hotel restaurant, her voice carrying that particular tone she'd perfected since childhood, the one that meant trouble was coming and she was going to enjoy delivering it. I looked up from my scrambled eggs, already sensing where this conversation was headed. Wayne sat 2 tables over with Lori, both of them scrolling through their phones, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing between Julia and me. They'd managed to stay out of our family drama for the most part, but that was about to change. "What's on your mind, Julia?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table. "I've been thinking about my grandmother's will. About the house." The house. Of course it came back to the house. Our grandmother's Victorian home in Salem had been the source of tension for months. When the will was read, it became clear that grandmother had left the property to both Julia and me, with the stipulation that we either live in it together or sell it and split the proceeds. Julia wanted to sell immediately. I wanted to keep it in the family. "We've discussed this already," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm not ready to sell." "Well, maybe this will help you reconsider." Julia reached into her purse and pulled out a single boarding pass. I took the liberty of changing our travel arrangements. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean I booked myself on the 2:15 flight to Chicago. You, however, don't have a ticket." Her smile was razor sharp. "I figured if you're so attached to grandmother's things, you might want to stay in Portland a little longer. Think about what really matters." The restaurant seemed to blur around the edges. "Julia, you can't be serious. My job, my apartment, oh, I'm completely serious. I paid for both our original tickets, remember? Since you're being so stubborn about the house, I decided to make some executive decisions about our travel budget." 2. Wayne's laughter drifted over from his table, where he was showing Lori something on his phone. They had no idea what was unfolding just a few feet away. Wayne had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who tried to smooth over Julia's more dramatic moments. Lori, his wife of 6 years, had learned to navigate our family dynamics with the skill of someone who'd rather be anywhere else during our conflicts. "You realize this is insane, right?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just strand me here because we disagree about real estate." Julia shrugged, her expression completely unbothered. "I can and I did. Maybe when you're sitting in some budget motel tonight, you'll see reason. The house needs to be sold, Diana. I have plans for that money." I knew about her plans. Julia worked in marketing for a tech startup that was perpetually on the verge of either massive success or complete failure. She'd been talking for months about investing in some cryptocurrency venture that sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme. The money from grandmother's house would fund her latest get-rich-quick obsession. "What plans?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "There's an opportunity in the blockchain space. My friend Marcus has connections with this company that's about to revolutionize digital transactions, but the minimum investment is $50,000, and with my half of the house money, I could get in on the ground floor. Of course. Another one of Julia's foolproof investment strategies. Last year, it was that organic juice bar franchise that folded within 6 months. Before that, it was the boutique fitness studio that never opened its doors. Our grandmother's house was just the latest casualty in Julia's ongoing war against financial stability. Grandmother left us that house because she wanted it to stay. In the family, I said. She told me so herself, remember? Last Christmas when she pulled me aside in the kitchen. Spare me the sentimental speech, Julia interrupted. Grandmother's gone, Diana. The house is just wood and brick now. But that money? That money could actually do something useful. Useful. As if preserving our family history wasn't useful. As if maintaining the place where 4 generations of our family had lived, loved, and created memories wasn't worthwhile. But Julia had never been one for sentiment. Even as children, she'd been the one to throw away birthday cards and sell toys the moment she outgrew them. I watched her finish her coffee with the casual satisfaction of someone who'd just solved a complicated problem. In her mind, she probably had. Strand Diana in Portland, force her to see reason, collect the money, and move on with life. Simple and efficient, just like Julia preferred. So, what's your plan here? I asked. I miss my flight. I'm stuck in Portland with no money, and then what? I call you crying and begging to sell the house? Something like that. She checked her watch, a rose gold piece that had cost more than my monthly grocery budget. My flight leaves in 4 hours. I should probably head to the airport soon. The casual cruelty of it was almost impressive. Julia had orchestrated this entire scenario with the precision of a military operation. She'd probably planned it before we even left for the funeral, waiting for the perfect moment to drop her ultimatum. Wayne's voice carried over from his table. Babe, we should probably think about heading out soon, too. Traffic to the airport can be brutal. Lori nodded, gathering her things. I still can't believe how beautiful the service was yesterday. Your grandmother would have loved seeing everyone together like that. If only she knew how together we really were. Julia stood up, smoothing down her black dress. The same dress she'd worn to the funeral, though she'd accessorized it differently today. Yesterday it was pearls and solemnity. Today it was gold jewelry and victory. I'm going to go pack, she announced. Diana, I hope you'll think seriously about what we discussed. There's still time to change your mind. She walked away without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against the restaurant's hardwood floor. I sat there for a moment, staring at the dregs of my coffee and trying to process what had just happened. My sister had essentially taken me hostage over a real estate disagreement. It was so absurd it almost felt like fiction. Wayne appeared at my table before I'd fully collected my thoughts. Hey, Diana. Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. If only it were that simple. Ghosts, at least, usually had understandable motivations. Julia and I had a disagreement about travel arrangements, I said, which was probably the understatement of the year. Oh. Wayne's expression shifted to that careful neutrality he'd perfected over years of navigating family drama. Anything Lori and I can help with? The question was kind, but I could see the hesitation in his eyes. Wayne had his own life to worry about. He and Lori ran a small marketing consultancy in Miami, and they'd already taken time off for the funeral. Getting involved in whatever mess Julia had created wasn't exactly on their agenda. I'm not sure yet, I said honestly. I might need to figure out some alternative travel plans. Alternative plans? Lori had joined us, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder. Is everything all right? Wayne shot her a look that clearly communicated family drama in progress, and Lori's expression immediately shifted to polite concern, mixed with a healthy dose of, please don't make this my problem. Julia decided to make some unilateral decisions about our flights, I explained. I'm working through the logistics. It was another masterpiece of understatement. But I wasn't ready to admit the full scope of Julia's manipulation to Wayne and Lori. They'd been nothing but kind to me over the years, but they weren't really my allies in this particular war. They were neutral parties who happened to be related by marriage, and I didn't want to drag them into something that could get ugly. "Well, if you need anything, let us know," Wayne said. "We're flying out at 3:30, so we'll be around for a few more hours. Thanks. I appreciate it." They headed back to their table, and I could see them whispering to each other as they gathered their things, probably trying to figure out what exactly had happened between Julia and me, and how much of it they needed to worry about. I pulled out my phone and opened the airline app. Maybe I could book a last-minute ticket on the same flight as Wayne and Lori. Or Julia, though the thought of sitting next to her for 3 hours made my stomach turn. But when I searched for available flights, reality hit like a sledgehammer. Everything to Boston was either completely booked or priced at over $800. The same was true for flights to anywhere on the East Coast. It was peak travel season, and I was trying to book same-day travel without any advance planning. The few available options would drain my checking account and max out my credit card. Julia had chosen her timing perfectly. She knew I couldn't afford to book an expensive last-minute flight. She knew I'd be stuck in Portland, forced to find a cheap hotel and figure out how to get home on my limited budget. It was psychological, warfare disguised as a family disagreement. I closed the app and leaned back in my chair. Around me, the hotel restaurant buzzed with the quiet energy of business travelers and tourists. People checking out, people planning their days, people living their normal lives without being held hostage by their siblings. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a 28-year-old woman with a college degree and a decent job, being manipulated by my older sister like we were still children fighting over toys. But Julia had always been good at finding people's pressure points and applying just enough force to get what she wanted. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The house was my pressure point. She knew how much it meant to me, knew about all the summers I'd spent there with grandmother, knew about the hours we'd spent together in that kitchen talking about family history and traditions. Julia had been there for some of those conversations too, but they'd never meant the same thing to her. To Julia, the house was an asset to be liquidated. To me, it was the last tangible connection to a woman who'd shaped my entire worldview. Grandmother had been the one to encourage my love of history, the one who'd supported my decision to become a museum curator when everyone else thought it was impractical. She'd been my anchor during my parents' messy divorce, my cheerleader during college, and my confidant during every major life decision. The house held all of that. Every creaking floorboard, every sun-faded photograph, every piece of furniture that had been carefully chosen and lovingly maintained. Julia saw square footage and market value. I saw home. But sitting in that hotel restaurant, watching the clock tick toward Julia's departure time, I realized something important. This wasn't really about the house at all. This was about control. Julia couldn't force me to sell, so she'd found another way to exert power over the situation. She'd made me dependent on her goodwill and turned my travel plans into leverage. It was brilliant, in a sociopathic sort of way. My phone buzzed with a text message. Julia, of course. Heading to the airport now. Last chance to be reasonable about grandmother's house. Think about your future, Diana. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to give Julia the satisfaction of begging. 2 hours later, I found myself in the back of a taxi heading to Denver International Airport with no ticket, no plan, and a growing sense that I was about to make either the best or worst decision of my life. The taxi driver, a weathered man named Roberto, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this, miss? Airport's expensive if you're just going to turn around and come back." "I'm sure," I lied. The truth was, I had no idea what I was doing. After Julia left the hotel, I'd spent an hour pacing my room, alternating between fury and desperation. The reasonable thing would have been to book a cheap hotel for a few days, maybe catch a bus back to Boston when I could afford it. But something about Julia's smug certainty had ignited a stubborn streak I didn't even know I possessed. I wasn't going to let her win this easily. My phone had been buzzing with messages from work. My boss, Margaret, was expecting me back tomorrow for a major exhibition opening at the museum. The Revolutionary Women of New England display had been my project for 8 months, and missing the opening wasn't just unprofessional, it was career suicide. "Diana, where are you? The caterers need approval on the final setup, and the board members are asking questions." Margaret's voicemail had the strained patience of someone trying very hard not to panic. I'd tried calling her back to explain the situation, but how do you tell your boss that your sister has stranded you in another state over a family property dispute? It sounded like something out of a soap opera. The airport terminal loomed ahead, its peaked white roof looking like a massive camping tent against the Colorado sky. Roberto pulled up to the departure level, and I handed him cash while trying to look more confident than I felt. "Good luck, miss," he said, and something in his tone suggested I was going to need it. Inside the terminal, the usual chaos of modern travel surrounded me. Families wrestling with oversized luggage, business travelers glued to their phones, children running in circles while their parents tried to maintain some semblance of order. The departure boards flickered with information about delays, gate, changes, and cancellations. I found Julia's gate easily enough. Gate B23, boarding in 90 minutes. She was sitting in the waiting area, typing furiously on her laptop, probably working on her latest blockchain investment presentation. Wayne and Lori were 3 gates down, sharing a sandwich and looking like the picture of marital contentment. The plan, such as it was simple. I was going to confront Julia one more time, in public, where she couldn't just walk away or hang up on me. I was going to make her understand that her manipulation wasn't going to work, and then, well, I hadn't thought that far ahead. But as I approached her gate, I noticed something that made me pause. Julia wasn't alone. She was talking to a woman in a navy blue uniform, a flight attendant by the look of it. The conversation seemed intense, almost urgent. I moved closer, pretending to study the departure board while straining to hear their exchange. "I'm telling you, it's definitely her," the flight attendant was saying. "Diana Walsh, right? I'd recognize her anywhere after what happened in Boston." My blood turned to ice. They were talking about me. But what could a flight attendant possibly know about me? I'd never been involved in any kind of airline incident, never caused any trouble during travel. I was the kind of passenger who said, "Please and thank you," and never complained about delayed flights. Julia's voice was sharp with interest. "You know my sister?" "Know her? She's practically famous in our industry. What she did last year?" The flight attendant shook her head. "Let's just say United Airlines owes her more than they could ever repay." Famous? United Airlines? I felt like I was hearing about someone else's life. But then fragments of memory began to surface, pieces of a puzzle I'd forgotten I'd been solving. Last year. The conference in Chicago. The emergency landing. Oh no. It hit me like a physical blow. The incident I'd tried so hard to forget. The reason I'd switched to a different airline for all subsequent travel. But I'd never thought about how it might have affected other people, how word might have spread through the aviation industry. Julia was leaning forward now, her laptop forgotten. What exactly did she do? The flight attendant, her name tag read Sarah, glanced around nervously. "Look, I probably shouldn't be talking about this, but your sister saved a lot of lives last year. The whole crew knows the story. When that passenger went into cardiac arrest over Kansas, and our medical kit was missing the crucial medication, Diana didn't just sit there like most people would. Sarah's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She had the passenger's exact medication in her carry-on. Turned out she'd been traveling with her elderly neighbor's prescription by mistake, grabbed the wrong bag at her apartment. Pure coincidence, but if she hadn't spoken up, if she hadn't recognized the symptoms... Julia's face had gone pale. I don't understand. The passenger would have died, Sarah said simply. No question about it, but that's not even the remarkable part. When we made the emergency landing in Denver, Diana insisted on riding in the ambulance and stayed with the man and his wife at the hospital for 12 hours. Missed her entire conference, paid for their hotel room when insurance wouldn't cover it, made sure they had everything they needed. The terminal seemed to spin around me. I remembered all of it. Mr. Harrison, 73 years old, traveling with his wife to their granddaughter's wedding. The way his face had turned gray, the panic in his wife's eyes, the flight attendant, asking if anyone had medical training. I'd grabbed the wrong prescription bottle that morning, my elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson's heart medication, instead of my own vitamins. When I'd heard Mr. Harrison's symptoms, something had clicked. Mrs. Patterson had described the same chest pains, the same shortness of breath, before her doctor prescribed that exact medication. It had been instinct more than heroism. See a problem? Try to fix it. I'd never thought about it as anything special, certainly never expected it to become some kind of airline industry story. Sarah was still talking. The passenger's name was Harrison. Turned out he was some kind of retired airline executive working for United for 30 years. When he recovered, he made sure everyone in the industry heard about what Diana Walsh had done. There's probably not a flight crew in America that doesn't know her name. Julia was staring at Sarah like she was speaking a foreign language. But Diana never mentioned any of this. From what I heard, she never wanted any recognition. Refused interviews, wouldn't take any reward money. The Harrison family tried to thank her publicly, but she wouldn't let them. Said she just did what anyone would do. Anyone. That was exactly what I'd thought at the time. Anyone would have helped if they could. Anyone would have stayed at the hospital, made sure an elderly couple wasn't stranded in a strange city. It hadn't felt like heroism. It had felt like basic human decency. But listening to Sarah describe it, seeing the respect in her voice, I began to understand how other people might have seen it differently. Julia was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded strange. So when Diana gets on a flight, red carpet treatment, Sarah said with a smile. Free upgrades, priority boarding, whatever we can do. It's not official policy, but word gets around. Most of us figure we owe her that much. I felt like I was watching this conversation through glass, like it was happening to someone else. The Diana they were describing sounded like a character from a movie, not the woman who'd been manipulated and stranded by her own sister just hours earlier. Julia's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it absently. I should probably... she started to say, then stopped. Sarah, what would happen if Diana showed up here today? If she needed to get on a flight? Sarah's smile widened. Honey, if Diana... Walsh walked up to this gate right now, I'd bump someone to first class to make room for her. That woman could fly anywhere in the country just by asking nicely. The conversation continued, but I'd stopped listening. My mind was racing, trying to process this new information about myself. I'd spent the morning feeling powerless, manipulated, trapped by Julia's schemes. But apparently I had resources I'd never even considered. More than that, I had a reputation I'd never known existed. In an industry where passengers were usually just seat numbers and boarding passes, I was remembered. Not for causing trouble or making demands, but for doing something good when it mattered. Julia was gathering her things now, her expression thoughtful. Sarah had moved on to help other passengers, but I could see Julia's mind working, probably trying to figure out how this new information affected her plans. I stepped back behind a pillar, my heart pounding. This changed everything. Julia thought she held all the cards, but apparently I had a few of my own that I'd never known how to play. The question was, what was I going to do with this knowledge? My phone buzzed again. Another message from Margaret. About the exhibition. Another reminder of the life waiting for me back in Boston. The responsibilities I couldn't just abandon. But for the first time since Julia had delivered her ultimatum, I felt something other than helplessness. I felt the possibility. I spent the next 20 minutes in the airport restroom, splashing cold water on my face and trying to make sense of what I'd just learned. The woman staring back at me in the mirror looked the same as always. Brown, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, minimal makeup, clothes chosen for comfort rather than style. Not exactly the appearance of someone with a legendary reputation in the aviation industry. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The unusually friendly treatment I'd received on my last few flights. The gate agent in Phoenix who'd upgraded me without explanation. The flight attendant in Seattle who'd brought me an extra blanket and asked if I needed anything else, multiple times throughout the flight. I'd attributed it all to random kindness, the occasional bright spot in an industry notorious for treating passengers like cattle. It had never occurred to me that these people might actually know who I was. The restroom door opened, and a woman in a business suit entered, talking loudly on her phone about quarterly projections and market forecasts. The sound jolted me back to reality. I had decisions to make, and standing in an airport bathroom wasn't going to solve anything. I walked back toward the gate area, but this time I approached from a different angle. Julia was still sitting in the same spot, but now she was on her phone, speaking in the hushed tones she used for important business calls, probably her blockchain contact, discussing investment strategies and market timing. Wayne and Lori had moved closer to their gate, and I could see them going through their pre-flight routine, checking documents, organizing carry-on bags, making sure they had everything they needed for boarding. They looked relaxed, comfortable, like people whose travel plans were proceeding exactly as expected, which gave me an idea. I approached their seating area casually, pretending to check the departure board above their heads. Wayne looked up from his phone and smiled. "Diana, how are the travel arrangements working out?" "Still figuring things out," I said, which was technically true. "Can I ask you something? What airline are you flying today?" "United," Lori answered, looking up from her magazine. "Why?" "Perfect." "Just curious. How's their service these days?" Wayne shrugged. "Fine, I guess. We've flown with them a few times. Pretty standard experience. Nothing special, but no major complaints either." "That's good to hear." I paused as if considering something. "Actually, do you mind if I sit with you for a few minutes? I'm trying to figure out my next move, and being around family helps me think." "Of course," Lori said, scooting over to make room on the bench. "Family drama is complicated enough without having to deal with it alone." I sat down, positioning myself so I could see Julia's gate while appearing to focus on Wayne and Lori. Julia was still on her phone, but I noticed her glancing in our direction occasionally. Probably wondering what I was doing, whether I was planning some kind of counter move. "Can I ask what happened between you and Julia?" Wayne said carefully. "You don't have to share if it's too personal, but maybe talking it through would help." It was a kind offer, and Wayne's genuine concern made Julia's manipulation seem even more cruel by comparison. Here was someone offering support without any ulterior motives, while my own sister was using my transportation as a bargaining chip. "Julia thinks she can force me to sell our grandmother's house by controlling how I get home," I said simply. "She canceled my ticket and booked herself on a different flight." Lori's mouth fell open. "She did what?" "Left me stranded here in Denver. The idea is that I'll get desperate enough to agree to sell the house if it means getting home." Wayne looked genuinely shocked. That's actually kind of insane, Diana. Even for family drama, that's pretty extreme." "Julia's always been good at finding creative solutions to problems," I said dryly. "This is just her latest innovation." "What are you going to do?" Lori asked. Can you afford to book your own flight? I was about to answer when I noticed something happening at Julia's gate. Sarah, the flight attendant I'd overheard earlier, was back, and she was talking to another uniformed airline employee, a man with captain's stripes on his shoulders. Their conversation looked serious, professional. Sarah was pointing in different directions, gesturing toward the gate area, explaining something that required detailed hand movements. The captain was nodding, asking questions, taking notes on a small pad. Then Sarah pointed directly at me. My stomach dropped. The captain followed her gesture, his eyes meeting mine across the crowded gate area. He said something to Sarah, who nodded emphatically. Then he started walking in my direction. Diana? Wayne's voice seemed to come from very far away. You look like you've seen a ghost. The captain was halfway across the gate area now, moving with the purposeful stride of someone on an official mission. Other passengers were starting to notice, their conversations trailing off as they watched this uniformed airline officer navigate through the crowd with obvious intent. Julia had noticed too. She'd ended her phone call and was staring at the approaching captain with obvious confusion. I could see her trying to figure out what was happening, why airline personnel were suddenly converging on our little family gathering. Ms. Walsh? The captain had reached our seating area, and his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Ms. Diana Walsh? Yes, I managed to say, though my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. He smiled, and the stern expression I'd expected transformed into something much warmer. Captain Rodriguez, United Airlines. Sarah told me you were in the terminal today. I wanted to introduce myself personally. Wayne and Lori were staring at this exchange like they were watching a foreign film without subtitles. I could feel other passengers turning to look, wondering why this captain was making a special point of talking to an apparently random traveler. I'm sorry, I said, struggling to find my voice. I think there might be some confusion. No confusion at all, Captain, Rodriguez said. You're Diana Walsh, who assisted with the medical emergency on Flight 1247 last year, correct? The Harrison incident? The gate area had gone noticeably quieter. Even the usual airport announcements seemed muted. I was acutely aware of dozens of people watching this conversation, including Julia, who had moved closer and was listening with an expression of growing bewilderment. Yes, that was me, I admitted. Captain Rodriguez's smile widened. Ms. Walsh, I've been flying for United for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did that day. When I heard you were in our terminal, I had to come over and thank you personally. Thank me? I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Anyone would have done the same thing. No, ma'am, they wouldn't have, Captain Rodriguez said firmly. Most passengers panic during medical emergencies. They freeze up, or they get in the way, or they assume someone else will handle it. What you did, recognizing the symptoms, having the exact medication needed, staying with the Harrison family through their entire ordeal, that was extraordinary. Wayne leaned forward, his expression fascinated. Diana, what is he talking about? Before I could answer, Captain Rodriguez continued. Mr. Harrison recovered completely, by the way. He and his wife send Christmas cards to our crew every year. And they always mention you. They've tried to track you down to thank you properly, but I moved apartments, I said quickly. New address, new phone number. They figured as much. But they wanted me to tell you, if I ever met you, that their granddaughter got married as planned. Beautiful ceremony, apparently. Mr. Harrison walked her down the aisle just like he'd always dreamed of doing. Something in my chest tightened. I remembered Mrs. Harrison's tears in the hospital, how she'd kept saying that her husband was supposed to walk their granddaughter down the aisle in 3 weeks. It had been the thing she was most afraid of losing. Not just her husband's life, but his presence at this milestone moment. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. There's more, Captain Rodriguez said. Mr. Harrison was a retired United executive, and after he recovered, he made sure your story reached every level of our company. There's a commendation in your file, Ms. Walsh. Official recognition from our corporate leadership. A commendation. In my file. I was starting to understand that my random act of kindness had created ripple effects I'd never imagined. Julia had moved close enough to hear everything now, her face cycling through expressions of confusion, disbelief, and something. That might have been embarrassment. The boarding announcement for her flight played in the background, but she seemed to have completely forgotten about her travel plans. Captain Rodriguez, I said carefully, I appreciate you telling me about Mr. Harrison, but I should mention that I don't actually have a ticket today. I'm just seeing family off. His eyebrows rose. You need to travel somewhere? Boston, I said. But all the flights are booked or extremely expensive, and Boston? Captain Rodriguez looked, genuinely surprised. Ms. Walsh, you could have a seat on any United flight to Boston just by asking. Where did you get the idea that you needed to book in advance? Wayne made a small sound that might have been a surprise or amusement. Lori was staring at me like I'd just revealed a secret identity. And Julia looked like someone who'd just realized she'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing a completely different game. I don't understand, I said. Captain Rodriguez pulled out his phone and started typing. Give me 2 minutes. I'm checking our Boston flights for today. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. We have a 4:30 departure with available seats. First class, if you'd prefer, though the coach is fine too. What's your preference? The question hung in the air like something from an alternate reality. Was this airline captain really offering to put me on a flight to Boston just like that? No booking fees, no credit card requirements, no complicated reservation process? I can't afford first class, I said honestly. Captain Rodriguez looked genuinely confused. Ms. Walsh, you wouldn't be paying for anything. This is United's way of saying thank you. We should have offered this a year ago, frankly. Julia stepped forward, her voice sharp with disbelief. Wait a minute. You're telling me that Diana can just get on a plane? For free? Captain Rodriguez turned to her, with polite interest. Are you family? I'm her sister, Julia. Something in his tone suggested he'd heard about family dynamics from other passengers. Yes, Ms. Walsh has earned considerable goodwill with our airline. This is just good customer service. But it wasn't just customer service, and everyone in the gate area seemed to understand that. This was recognition, gratitude, the kind of treatment usually reserved for celebrities or frequent flyer elites, and I'd earned it not through wealth or status, but through a single moment of human decency during someone else's crisis. The boarding announcement for Julia's flight played again, more insistent this time. She glanced toward her gate, then back, at Captain Rodriguez, clearly torn between her travel schedule and this unfolding revelation about her sister. Diana, she said, her voice uncertain for the first time all day. We should talk. But Captain Rodriguez was already moving forward, with arrangements. Ms. Walsh, if you'd like to take that Boston flight, I can have you checked in and ready to board in 10 minutes. We'll make sure you have everything you need. I looked at Julia, standing there with her boarding pass clutched in her hand, her carefully planned manipulation crumbling around her. Then I looked at Wayne and Lori, who were watching this entire scene with the fascination of people witnessing something they'd never seen before. Finally, I looked at Captain Rodriguez, this professional, competent man who was offering me exactly what I needed most, a way home that didn't depend on Julia's goodwill or my limited finances. Yes, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I'd like to take that flight to Boston. The next 10 minutes unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance that I was somehow the star of, despite having no idea what steps I was supposed to perform. Captain Rodriguez had summoned what appeared to be half the airport staff. A gate agent named Marcus appeared with a tablet, typing rapidly while asking me questions about seat preferences and meal requirements. A baggage handler materialized to confirm I had no checked luggage. Even a TSA supervisor showed up, apparently, to expedite my security clearance for the gate change. "This is completely unnecessary," I kept saying, but nobody seemed to be listening. "Ms. Walsh, we need to get you to gate C12, Marcus explained, his fingers flying across the tablet screen. "Your boarding pass is printed now, and we'll have someone escort you through security if needed." "I already went through security this morning," I said, though I couldn't remember why I'd done that without a ticket. "Perfect. Then we just need to get you to the new gate. Your flight boards in 45 minutes. Wayne stood up from the bench, his expression somewhere between amazement and confusion. "Diana, this is incredible. It's like watching someone discover they're secretly royalty." Lori nodded enthusiastically. "I've never seen anything like this. They're treating you like a VIP. But the person I was most aware of was Julia. She stood about 10 feet away, still holding her own boarding pass, watching this entire production, with an expression that shifted between disbelief and something that might have been shame. Her boarding announcement had played twice more, and flight attendants at her gate were starting to look around for missing passengers. "Julia," I said, finally addressing her directly. "Aren't you going to miss your flight?" She looked down at her boarding pass as if seeing it for the first time. Yes, probably." Captain Rodriguez overheard and glanced at his watch. "What's your departure time?" 2:15, Julia said quietly. "Gate B23. "Chicago flight?" When Julia nodded, Captain Rodriguez pulled out his radio. "We can hold that flight for a few minutes if you need to resolve something with your sister." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Julia could board her flight right now, stick to her original plan, pretend this entire revelation about my airline reputation had never happened. Or she could acknowledge that her strategy had not only failed, but had made her look petty and manipulative in front of multiple airline employees. "Diana," she said, her voice softer than it had been all day. "Can we talk privately for a minute?" I looked at Captain Rodriguez, who nodded understandingly. "We'll get your paperwork finished while you handle family business." Julia and I walked toward a quieter area near the windows, away from the crowd that had gathered around the United Airlines crew. The late afternoon sun streamed through the massive glass panels, casting long shadows across the terminal floor. "I had no idea," Julia said once we were out of earshot, "about any of this. The emergency, the Harrison family, your reputation." "I never told anyone," I said simply. "It didn't seem important." "Not important?" Julia's voice rose slightly, then dropped back down. "Diana, you saved someone's life. You have airline executives sending you Christmas cards. How is that not important?" I shrugged, genuinely unsure how to answer. It was just something that happened. I helped someone who needed help. People do that every day. "No, they don't." Julia was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger. Most people would have sat in their seats and let the flight crew handle it. Most people wouldn't have stayed at the hospital, wouldn't have paid for hotel rooms, wouldn't have... "Why didn't you ever tell me about this?" The question caught me off guard. Why hadn't I told her? The answer, when I found it, surprised me. "Because I knew you wouldn't understand," I said honestly. "You would have asked why I didn't get any money out of it, or why I didn't leverage it for something useful. You would have found a way to make it about missed opportunities instead of just doing the right thing." Julia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "You're probably right about that." Another boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Her flight, final call. Julia glanced toward her gate, then back at me. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "Yes, you should." "Diana, about the house," she started, then stopped. "About what I did today." I waited, but she seemed to be struggling with words that wouldn't come. I was wrong, she finally managed. Not just about the ticket thing, but about thinking you were naive, about thinking sentiment doesn't have value, about treating you like you didn't know what you were doing with your life. It was probably the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from Julia, and honestly, it was more than I'd expected. The house still matters to me, I said. Keeping it in the family still matters. I know. Julia looked toward the windows, watching planes taxi on the distant runways. Maybe we can figure out a different solution. Something that doesn't involve me being a complete monster to my sister. The final boarding call for Julia's flight crackled through the speakers, more insistent now. You really need to go, I said. Yeah. She hesitated for another moment. Diana, when you get back to Boston, when you're settled, call me. We'll talk about the house properly this time, like adults. Okay. Julia started to walk away, then turned back. And Diana? I'm sorry. For all of it. She hurried toward her gate, moving quickly to catch her flight. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. Relief, certainly. Vindication, maybe. But also something like sadness because today had revealed just how far apart Julia and I had grown. Ms. Walsh? Marcus appeared at my elbow, holding a leather portfolio. Your boarding documents are ready. First class, window seat, meal selection confirmed. Is there anything else we can arrange for your comfort? I accepted the portfolio, still feeling slightly surreal about the entire situation. This is really generous, but I want to make sure I understand. This doesn't cost anything? There's no catch? Marcus smiled. No catch. This is a gesture of appreciation from United Airlines. Mr. Harrison was very influential in our company, and your actions reflect the kind of values we want to support. A thought occurred to me. Marcus, can I ask you something? How many people know about this? About what happened on that flight? Quite a few, actually. The story gets told in our training programs as an example of passenger heroism. New flight attendants learn about the Harrison incident as part of their emergency response curriculum. He paused. You're kind of famous in our industry, Ms. Walsh, in the best possible way. Famous. There was that word again. It still felt strange, like a costume that didn't quite fit. We should get you to your gate, Marcus continued. First-class boards in 20 minutes. We walked through the terminal, past the endless shops and restaurants, past families saying goodbye and business travelers checking their phones. But I felt different now, like I was moving through the same space but from a completely different perspective. Wayne and Lori were waiting at gate C12 when we arrived, their own boarding passes in hand. Wait, I said, looking at their tickets. You're on the same flight? 4:30 to Boston, Lori confirmed. What are the odds? Wayne grinned. Looks like we'll have company for the trip home, though I'm guessing you'll be sitting in a different section than we are. I looked down at my boarding pass. First class, seat 2A. Wayne and Lori were in coach, Rose back in the main cabin. This feels wrong, I said. You two have been nothing but kind to me today, and I'm getting special treatment, while you're stuck in regular seats. Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange, cleared his throat. Ms. Walsh, if you'd like your family members to join you in first class, I'm sure we can arrange something. They're not exactly family, I started to say, then stopped. Wayne and Lori had shown me more support in one day than Julia had managed in months. Actually, yes, if it's possible, I'd love for them to sit with me. Marcus made a quick radio call, spoke to someone in rapid, professional tones, then smiled. Done. We'll have new boarding passes printed in just a moment. Wayne looked stunned. Diana, you don't need to do that. Yes, I do, I said firmly. You two stayed neutral in a family drama that wasn't your responsibility. You offered help when you didn't have to. And you're the reason I'm even at this airport instead of sulking in a hotel room. It was true. If Wayne hadn't been kind, if Lori hadn't made space for me at their gate, I might never have been in position to overhear Sarah's conversation with Julia. I might never have learned about my reputation, never have met Captain Rodriguez, never have discovered that I had options I'd never known existed. The gate agent handed us all new boarding passes. Wayne and Lori were now in seats 2B and 2C, right next to me in the first-class cabin. I feel like I should be documenting this somehow, Lori said, examining her upgraded boarding pass. This is definitely the strangest travel day I've ever had. The boarding announcement began, starting with first-class passengers. As we gathered our things, I caught sight of Julia's gate in the distance. Her flight was pushed back from the jetway, beginning its taxi toward the runway. She was on her way back to Chicago, back to her blockchain investments and get-rich-quick schemes. But for the first time, I wasn't worried about what Julia might do next. Today had taught me something important. I had more resources than I'd realized, more support than I'd known, and more value than my sister had ever been willing to acknowledge. "Ready to go home?" Wayne asked as we lined up for boarding. I looked at my boarding pass one more time, at the first-class seat I'd never paid for, earned through a moment of kindness I'd nearly forgotten. Tomorrow I'd be back at the museum, opening the exhibition I'd worked on for 8 months. Tomorrow I'd return to my regular life as a curator who helped preserve history for future generations. But I'd also be someone who knew that doing the right thing, even when nobody's watching, sometimes creates ripples that reach farther than you could ever imagine. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready to go home." The first-class cabin of United Flight 892 was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and judging by Wayne and Lori's expressions, they were having the same revelation. The seats were more like small personal offices, with enough legroom for someone. Twice my height and controls for everything from lighting to lumbar support. "This is surreal," Lori whispered as we settled into our seats. "I keep expecting someone to come tell us there's been a mistake." Our flight attendant, a woman named Patricia with 20 years of experience written in the confident way she moved through the cabin, approached with champagne flutes on a silver tray. "Ms. Walsh," she said with a warm smile, "I wanted to introduce myself personally. I've heard so much about you from my colleagues. The Harrison story is legendary among our crew." I accepted the champagne, still feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's life. "Thank you, but honestly, I just did what anyone would do." Patricia's expression grew serious. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not true. I've been flying for 2 decades, and I've seen how most passengers react during medical emergencies. What you did was extraordinary, and it's had a lasting impact beyond just saving Mr. Harrison's life." Wayne leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "What kind of impact?" "Well," Patricia said, glancing around to make sure other passengers weren't listening. "After the Harrison incident, United updated our emergency response protocols. We now carry expanded medication kits on all flights, specifically because of what Diana experienced. Her actions quite literally changed how we prepare for medical emergencies." My hand froze halfway to my mouth with the champagne glass. "Changed protocols?" "The medication that saved Mr. Harrison's life is now standard equipment on every United flight," Patricia explained. "Diana's quick thinking identified a gap in our emergency preparedness, and the company took action. We estimate that the protocol changes have already prevented at least 3 potential tragedies on other flights." The cabin seemed to tilt around me, though I knew the plane was still parked at the gate. I'd saved Mr. Harrison's life, yes, but apparently that single action had created a chain reaction that was still saving lives a year later. "I had no idea," I managed to say. "There's more," Patricia continued. "The Harrison family established a scholarship fund at the University of Colorado's medical school. They call it the Diana Walsh Emergency Response Scholarship. It's for students who demonstrate exceptional compassion and quick thinking in crisis situations." Wayne made a small sound of amazement. "Diana, do you realize what this means? You have a scholarship named after you." I didn't realize. I couldn't process it. The idea that my split-second decision to speak up about medication had rippled outward into policy changes and educational funding felt impossible to grasp. The scholarship recipients get internships with hospital emergency departments, Patricia added. Last year's recipient, a young woman named Sarah Chen, said in her acceptance speech that she wanted to be the kind of person who could think clearly and act decisively when someone's life was on the line. She specifically mentioned your story as her inspiration. Sarah Chen, a real person, with real medical training, inspired by something I'd done without thinking. How many people might she help during her career? How many lives might be saved by someone who was motivated by a story about me that I'd never even heard? The plane began to push back from the gate, and Patricia excused herself to prepare for takeoff. I stared out the window at the Denver skyline, trying to reconcile this new version of myself with the woman who'd woken up this morning feeling powerless and manipulated. "Diana," Lori said quietly, "how are you processing all this?" It was a good question. How do you process learning that you're not just remembered for a good deed, but that your actions have become part of an airline's operational procedures and inspired future medical professionals? "I keep thinking about the butterfly effect," I said finally. "You know, the idea that small actions can have huge consequences. I grabbed the wrong prescription bottle by mistake, recognized some symptoms, and spoke up. But apparently that created this whole chain of events I never knew about." Wayne nodded thoughtfully. "It makes you wonder what other small things we do that might have bigger impacts than we realize." The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing into the late afternoon sky. Below us, Denver shrank to a grid of lights and roads, and I found myself thinking about Julia. She was probably somewhere over Kansas by now, on her way back to Chicago and her cryptocurrency schemes. But I was also thinking about something else she'd said during our conversation at the gate, about treating me like I was naive, like I didn't know what I was doing with my life. Maybe I hadn't known, not fully. But today showed me that the choices I'd been making, to help when I could, to put compassion before profit, to value preservation over quick gains, weren't signs of naivety. They were principles worth standing by. Patricia returned as we reached cruising altitude, bringing dinner menus and more stories. "I hope you don't mind me sharing this," she said. "But Captain Rodriguez asked me to tell you about something that happened last month. We had a passenger who was having a panic attack during turbulence. Really severe. Thought she was going to die. One of our newer flight attendants, someone who'd heard your story during training, stayed with her for the entire flight. Missed her break, missed her meal, just sat there and talked the woman through breathing exercises. She paused to hand us our menus. Afterwards, the passenger wrote a letter to corporate saying that the flight attendant saved her from what felt like a complete breakdown. But when we asked the attendant why she'd gone so far beyond normal protocol, she said she'd been thinking about the Diana Walsh story, about how sometimes going the extra mile for a stranger is exactly what the situation requires. Another ripple. Another life touched by a story I'd never known was being told. The passenger's name was Maria Santos, Patricia continued. She's a teacher in Sacramento. She told us that the flight attendant's kindness reminded her why she became an educator. In the first place, to help people through difficult moments. She said it changed how she approaches her classroom. I thought about Maria Santos, somewhere in California, teaching children with renewed passion because a flight attendant had been kind to her, and that flight attendant had been inspired by a story about me helping Mr. Harrison. How many students would Maria Santos influence over the course of her career? How many of them might grow up to help others because of the example she set? The dinner service was elaborate by any standard, but I barely tasted the food. My mind kept spinning through these connections, these chains of kindness and influence that apparently stretched across the country. "Wayne," I said during dessert, "do you think Julia knew about any of this?" He considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. Julia's always been focused on immediate, tangible results. This kind of long-term ripple effect impact wouldn't be on her radar. But it's real, Lori added. Maybe more real than whatever return she's expecting from her blockchain investment. That thought struck me with unexpected force. Julia was chasing financial returns that might never materialize, while I'd accidentally created returns I'd never even known to measure. Not monetary returns, but human ones. Lives saved, protocols improved, students inspired, teachers renewed. Patricia stopped by our seats one more time before landing, carrying a manila envelope. Ms. Walsh, I have something for you from Captain Rodriguez. He wanted you to have this before you left the airline today. Inside the envelope were photocopies of letters, dozens of them. Letters from passengers, crew members, airline executives, medical professionals, all of them connected somehow to the Harrison incident. The first letter was from Mr. and Mrs. Harrison themselves, written 6 months after the emergency landing. Dear Diana, we know you prefer to stay out of the spotlight, but we wanted you to know that our granddaughter Emily is now studying to become a paramedic. She says she was inspired by the story of how a stranger saved her grandfather's life through quick thinking and preparation. Emily wants to be ready to help people the way you helped us. Another letter was from a United flight attendant named Michael. The Harrison training module helped me save a passenger's life last week. A woman was choking during meal service, and I remembered the emphasis on staying calm and acting decisively that came from your story. I knew exactly what to do because of the training that grew out of your actions. A third letter was from someone named Dr. Jennifer Martinez at Denver General Hospital. I was the emergency room physician who treated Mr. Harrison when he arrived. I've never seen someone transition from critical condition to stable so smoothly, and it was entirely because of the immediate intervention he received on the plane. Your actions didn't just save his life, they prevented permanent heart damage that would have affected him for whatever time he had remaining. There were more. Stories of lives saved, careers chosen, protocols improved, kindness multiplied. An entire ecosystem of positive change that had grown from one moment of accidental preparedness and intentional compassion. As the plane began its descent into Boston, I looked out at the city lights spread below us like a constellation. Somewhere, down there was my apartment, my job at the museum, my regular life full of historical artifacts and exhibition planning. But I was returning to that life as a different person than the one who'd left it. Not because anything fundamental had changed about who I was, but because I finally understood what I'd been all along. Diana, Wayne said as we prepared for landing, what are you going to do about the house? About Julia's demands? I folded the letters carefully and put them back in the envelope. I'm going to keep it, I said. Not just because it's family history, but because preservation matters. Because some things are worth more than their immediate cash value. And for the first time in months, I knew exactly why that was true. The Boston skyline looked different from 30,000 feet than it had when I'd left for Portland 4 days ago. Maybe it was the approaching sunset painting everything in gold. Or maybe it was the perspective I'd gained during the strangest travel day of my life. But as we descended toward Logan International Airport, I felt like I was seeing my city with new eyes. Wayne stretched in his seat, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him all week. You know, Diana, I have to ask, what are you going to do with all this information? About your reputation, the scholarship, all of it? It was a question I'd been wrestling with since Patricia had handed me that envelope full of letters. For a year, I'd been living my life completely unaware that my actions had created ripples across an entire industry. Now that I knew, what was I supposed to do with that knowledge? I honestly don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to pretend this never happened and just go back to my normal life. But another part feels like I have some kind of responsibility now. Lori turned in her seat to face me. Responsibility to who? To the people who've been inspired by this story I didn't even know was being told. To Sarah Chen, the scholarship recipient. To Maria Santos, the teacher. To Emily Harrison, who's studying to become a paramedic. I paused, thinking about all the names Patricia had mentioned. If my story is out there motivating people to help others, maybe I should be more intentional about that. The plane touched, down smoothly at Logan, and as we taxied toward the gate, I found myself thinking about Margaret and the exhibition opening. Revolutionary women of New England. Women who'd made a difference in their communities through small acts of courage and compassion. Women whose stories had been overlooked by history until someone took the time to preserve and share them. Maybe I understood those women better now than I had when I'd started planning the exhibition 8 months ago. As we deplaned, Patricia was waiting at the gate with one final surprise. "Ms. Walsh, I have someone here who wants to meet you." Standing beside her was a young woman in scrubs, maybe 25 years old, with tired eyes and a warm smile. She looked like she'd just finished a long shift at a hospital. "Diana, I'm Sarah Chen," she said, extending her hand. "The scholarship recipient Patricia mentioned." I stared at her, speechless. This was the medical student inspired by my story, the one who'd given an acceptance speech about thinking clearly in crisis situations. "I work part-time at Massachusetts General while I finish my emergency medicine training," Sarah continued. "When I heard you were flying into Boston today, I asked to meet you. I hope that's okay." "Of course it's okay," I managed. "But how did you even know I was coming?" Sarah smiled. "The airline industry is smaller than you might think. Word travels fast when Diana Walsh is traveling." We walked through the terminal together, Wayne and Lori flanking us like an impromptu entourage. Sarah talked about her studies, her work, in the emergency department, and how the story of the Harrison incident had shaped her approach to medicine. "The thing that struck me most," she said as we reached the baggage claim area, "wasn't just that you had the right medication. It was that you stayed. You didn't just hand over the pills and consider your good deed done. You went to the hospital. You made sure the family was okay. You treated their crisis like it was your own responsibility." We stopped walking, and Sarah turned to face me directly. "That's what I try to do in the ER every day. Not just treat the medical emergency, but remember that behind every patient is a family, a story, a life that extends far beyond whatever brought them to our doors." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn paperback book. "I wanted to give you something. It's a collection of essays about emergency medicine, but there's one piece in here that reminds me of your story." I accepted the book, touched by the gesture. The cover was dog-eared from frequent reading, and sticky notes protruded from various pages. "Thank you," I said. "This means more than you know." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Thank you for showing me what it looks like to be ready for the unexpected and to act with compassion when it matters most." As we parted ways in the terminal, I felt the weight of that book in my hands. Another connection, another person whose life had been touched by ripples I'd never known I was creating. The taxi ride into downtown Boston was quiet. Wayne and Lori had caught their own ride to their hotel, promising to stay in touch and thanking me repeatedly for the unexpected first-class experience. I sat in the back seat, watching familiar neighborhoods pass by, and thinking about the conversation I needed to have with Margaret first thing in the morning. The exhibition opening was tomorrow evening. 8 months of work, dozens of historical artifacts, hundreds of research hours, all culminating in a celebration of women who'd made a difference through small acts of courage. Women whose stories had been preserved and shared so that future generations could learn from their examples. Women like me, apparently, though I was still getting used to that idea. My apartment building looked exactly the same as when I'd left but I felt like a different person walking through the lobby. The elderly doorman, Mr. Peterson, waved from behind his desk. "Welcome back, Ms. Walsh. How was your trip?" "Educational," I said, which was certainly true. My apartment was quiet, filled with the slightly stale air of a place that had been empty for several days. I dropped my bags by the door and went straight to my computer. There were dozens of emails from work, messages from colleagues, updates about last-minute exhibition details. But first, I opened a new document and started typing. I wrote about the Harrison incident, not as I'd experienced it originally, but as I'd learned about it today. I wrote about Sarah Chen and Emily Harrison and Maria Santos. I wrote about protocol changes in scholarship funds and the unexpected ways that single moments of kindness can ripple outward through time and space. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with what I'd written. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. But I needed to process what had happened, to make sense of the day that had turned my understanding of myself completely upside down. When I finished writing, I called Julia. She answered. On the second ring, her voice cautious. Diana? Is everything okay? I'm home, I said. Safe and sound, courtesy of United Airlines. Diana, about today. I know, I interrupted gently. You apologized, and I accept it. But I wanted to call because I've made a decision about the house. Silence on the other end of the line. I'm keeping it, I continued. I'm going to move to Salem, live in my grandmother's house, and turn part of it into a research center for local history. There are grants available for historic preservation projects, and I think I can make it work financially. Diana, Julia's voice was uncertain. Are you sure? That's a big change from your museum job. I'm sure. Today taught me something important about the value of preservation, about the importance of keeping stories alive so they can inspire future generations. Grandmother's house isn't just family history, it's community history. It deserves to be preserved and shared. I paused, looking around my apartment at the life I'd built in Boston. A good life, but maybe not the one I was meant to keep forever. I'll buy out your half of the inheritance, I added. It might take me some time to arrange the financing, but I'll make sure you get fair market value. Julia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I'd heard it all day. Diana, you don't have to do that. After what I put you through today, after learning about who you really are and what you've accomplished, I don't feel right taking money from my grandmother's house. It was my turn to be surprised. What do you mean? I mean, maybe you're right about preservation having value beyond dollars. Maybe some things are worth more than their immediate cash. Return. She paused. Keep the house, Diana. Keep it all. I'll figure out another way to fund my investments. For the second time in one day, Julia had managed to completely surprise me. Are you sure? I asked. I'm sure. And Diana, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of who you are and what you've accomplished, even when I didn't understand it. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment for a long time, thinking about the day's events. This morning, I'd felt powerless, manipulated, trapped by circumstances beyond my control. Tonight, I was planning to uproot my entire life based on a new understanding of my own value and purpose. Tomorrow, I will open an exhibition about revolutionary women, women who'd made difficult choices, who'd preserved important things, who'd acted with courage and compassion, even when no one was watching. Tomorrow, I would also start planning my own revolution, leaving the museum, moving to Salem, turning my grandmother's house into something that honored both the past and the future. But tonight, I just sat in my apartment, holding Sarah Chen's book and thinking about the unexpected ways that life can change in a single day when you finally understand your own story. 6 months later, I stood in the front parlor of my grandmother's Victorian house in Salem, watching a group of high school students examine a collection of Civil War letters. The morning light streamed through the original stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the hardwood floors that had been polished to gleaming perfection. Ms. Walsh, one of the students said, holding up a faded envelope. This Letter is from a woman named Rebecca Morrison to her sister. She's describing how she turned her house into a makeshift hospital during the 1862 epidemic. Did people really do that back then? They did, I confirmed, walking over to examine the letter with her. Rebecca Morrison was your age when she made that decision. She had no medical training, no official authority, just a large house, and the conviction that her community needed help. The student, a junior named Ashley who reminded me of myself at that age, studied the letter more carefully. What happened to her? She saved 17 lives during that epidemic. The house you're standing in right now? Rebecca Morrison was my great-great-grandmother. This was her makeshift hospital. Ashley's eyes widened as she looked around the parlor with new understanding. We're standing in history. You're standing in the continuation of history, I corrected gently. Rebecca's story doesn't end with what she did in 1862. It continues with what you might choose to do with the inspiration you take from her example. It was a lesson I'd learned from my own unexpected story. The Harrison incident hadn't ended when the plane landed in Denver. It had continued through protocol changes and scholarship funds and inspired medical students like Sarah Chen, who'd visited twice since I'd moved to Salem. The Walsh Family History Center had been open for 3 months now, funded by a combination of historical preservation grants, community donations, and my own savings from selling my Boston apartment. What had started as a way to preserve my grandmother's house had evolved into something much larger. The doorbell chimed, its antique brass tone echoing through the foyer. I excused myself from the student group and went to answer it, expecting another researcher, or perhaps the documentary crew that was scheduled to film here next week. Instead, I found Captain Rodriguez standing on my front porch, looking somewhat uncomfortable in civilian clothes. Captain Rodriguez, I said, genuinely surprised. What brings you to Salem? He smiled, holding up a small wrapped package. I was in Boston for a conference, and I wanted to deliver this in person. It's from the Harrison family. I invited him in, leading him to the kitchen where we could talk privately while the students continued their research in the parlor. The kitchen had been my grandmother's favorite room, and I'd restored it to its original 1890s character while adding modern conveniences hidden behind period-appropriate facades. Coffee? I offered, gesturing toward the antique coffee service I'd learned to operate like a professional barista. Please. Captain Rodriguez settled into one of the Windsor chairs around the farmhouse table. Diana, I have to say, this place is remarkable. When I heard you'd left the museum to become a historic preservationist, I wondered if you knew what you were getting into. I poured coffee into china cups that had belonged to Rebecca Morrison. Some days I wonder about myself. But it feels right, you know? Like this is what I was meant to be doing all along. Captain Rodriguez accepted his coffee and gestured around the kitchen. The students in there, they're learning about local history. Local history, family genealogy, historical research methods. But really, they're learning about the connections between past and present, about how the choices people made generations ago still affect our lives today. I thought about Ashley examining Rebecca Morrison's letters, making the connection between a teenager's decision in 1862 and the possibilities in her own life. That moment of recognition was what made all the grant applications and restoration work worthwhile. Which brings me to why I'm here, Captain Rodriguez said, pushing the wrapped package across the table. The Harrison family asked me to give you this. They tried to reach you at the museum, but I never gave them my forwarding information. I realized. I wasn't trying to avoid them, I just didn't think they'd want to stay in touch. Diana, they credit you with saving not just Mr. Harrison's life, but their entire family's future. Their granddaughter Emily graduated from paramedic. School last month. She's working for Boston EMS now. Emily Harrison, the granddaughter who'd been inspired to enter emergency medicine because of her grandfather's story. Another ripple, still spreading outward. I unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a small silver frame containing a photograph of a young woman in paramedic uniform standing next to an ambulance. On the back, someone had written, "Emily Harrison, Boston EMS, class of 2025. Inspired by the stranger who saved her grandfather and showed her what it means to be ready to help." Below that, in different handwriting, "Diana, we can never repay what you did for our family, but we wanted you to see how your kindness continues to make a difference. Emily has already helped save 2 lives in her first month on the job. Your legacy grows every day. With eternal gratitude, Robert and Margaret Harrison." I stared at the photograph for a long moment, seeing myself reflected in this young woman's determined expression. Emily had chosen a career dedicated to helping others, in crisis, motivated by a story about someone who'd done exactly that. "There's more," Captain Rodriguez said gently. "The scholarship fund they established in your name, it's grown beyond what they originally imagined. They've received donations from all over the country. Passengers who heard your story, airline, employees, people who just wanted to support the idea of recognizing everyday heroism." He pulled out his phone and showed me a website. The Diana Walsh Emergency Response Scholarship Fund had its own homepage, complete with recipient profiles and updates on their careers. Sarah Chen was featured prominently, along with a dozen other students pursuing careers in emergency medicine, crisis response, and community service. "This year, they're awarding scholarships to 15 students," Captain Rodriguez continued. "Next year, they expect to fund 20. Your story has become a rallying point for people who believe in the importance of being prepared to help others." Scrolled through the website, reading profiles of young people from across the country who'd been inspired by the Harrison incident: pre-med students, future nurses, aspiring paramedics, emergency management majors. All of them are connected by a story about the importance of speaking up when someone needs help. "Captain Rodriguez," I said, setting down his phone, "I need to ask you something. All of this, the website, the scholarship expansion, the continued recognition, is this what Mr. Harrison wanted? Or is this becoming something beyond what he intended?" The captain considered the question carefully. "I think it's become exactly what he hoped it would become. Mr. Harrison spent 30 years in the airline industry watching people at their best and worst during travel crises. He always said that emergencies reveal character, and that the people who step up during those moments should be celebrated and supported." He paused to sip his coffee. "Your story gave him a way to put his money where his values were. But the fact that it's grown beyond his original donation? That's because other people recognize something valuable in what you represent." Through the kitchen window, I could see the students in the garden, examining the herb plots where Rebecca Morrison had grown medicinal plants during the 1862 epidemic. They were making connections between historical knowledge and contemporary applications, understanding that the past could inform present choices. "I have something to show you," I said, leading Captain Rodriguez to my study. The room had been my grandmother's library, and I'd kept most of her books while adding my own research materials. On the desk was a thick binder containing letters, emails, and documents I'd been collecting since moving to Salem. "These are stories people have sent me," I explained, opening the binder. "People who heard about the Harrison incident and wanted to share their own experiences with unexpected heroism." I showed him a letter from a teacher in Oregon who'd performed CPR on a student during recess, a message from a construction worker in Texas who'd pulled a family from a burning car, an email from a librarian in Maine who'd recognized the signs of domestic abuse and helped a patron escape a dangerous situation. "They all say the same thing," I continued. "That hearing about someone ordinary doing something extraordinary made them more aware of opportunities to help others, made them more confident about speaking up during emergencies." Captain Rodriguez read through several of the letters, his expression growing more amazed with each story. "Diana, do you realize what you've created here? This isn't just about the Harrison incident anymore. You've become a symbol for the idea that regular people can make extraordinary differences. I closed the binder and looked around the study at the combination of historical documents and contemporary correspondence. That's why I moved here, why I started the History Center. I realized that preserving stories isn't just about the past, it's about inspiring the future. The doorbell chimed again, and I heard Ashley's voice greeting someone in the foyer. Through the window, I could see a van marked Boston Channel 5 parked in the driveway. The documentary crew, I explained to Captain Rodriguez. They're filming a segment about local history preservation for a series on New England communities. But as we walked back toward the foyer, I realized this wasn't just about local history anymore. The students were excitedly talking to the news crew about Rebecca Morrison's letters, about the connections they'd discovered between past and present, about how learning these stories had changed their understanding of their own potential. Ashley was holding up the Civil War letter, explaining to the camera how a teenager in 1862 had turned her home into a hospital. It makes you think, she was saying, about what you would do if your community needed help. About whether you'd be brave enough to make a difference. Captain Rodriguez squeezed my shoulder. There's your legacy, Diana. Not just the lives you've saved directly, but the people you've inspired to think about how they could save lives too. As I watched Ashley being interviewed about historical heroism and contemporary responsibility, I thought about the chain of inspiration that had brought us all to this moment. Rebecca Morrison's courage in 1862 had inspired me to preserve her story. My accidental heroism on Flight 1247 had inspired others to be ready to help. And now, a new generation was being inspired to see themselves as potential heroes in their own communities. The documentary crew wanted to interview me about the History Center, about the importance of preserving family stories and local heritage. But as I sat in Rebecca Morrison's parlor, surrounded by students and historians and an airline captain who'd become an unexpected friend, I realized I had a different story to tell. I wanted to talk about the unexpected ways that single moments of compassion can ripple outward through time, about how helping one person can inspire policy changes that help thousands, about how preserving the stories of everyday heroes can motivate future generations to become heroes themselves, about how sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be ready when someone needs help, and then be willing to share that story so others can be ready too. The interview began, and I found myself talking not just about historical preservation, but about the continuing power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change, about Rebecca Morrison and Mr. Harrison and Emily Harrison and Sarah Chen and all the students sitting in this room who might someday save lives because they'd learned to see themselves as capable of making a difference. As the camera rolled and the late afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, I realized that this was exactly where I belonged. Not just preserving the past, but helping to create the future, one story at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.